Right.
And Heather, if I'm not right, wasn't the woman who we were talking about at the CAFES conference, wasn't she like transferred for complaining? Or like wasn't she like yeah, wrong like punished for complaining about the guy?
Um, she was offered to be moved to segregation where she could be away
Yeah.
from the person she was complaining about. We know of some other women who were maxed, like put to maximum security pending the outcome of an investigation, and women
Hmm.
who were transferred to other institutions in order to facilitate a
Yeah.
separation. So we
Hmm.
know about that sort of thing. But like to understand like this business about transferring and maximum security and segregation, it's important again to go back to that history, understanding that women's prisons were supposed to be everybody just in a house, and they were
Hmm.
all built just with houses. None
Hmm.
of them had a maximum security institution when they were
Exactly.
initially built. All of them
Hmm.
have had maximum security, like wings.
Hmm.
And segregation units built onto
Hmm.
them since they were originally built. But creating choices, the idea was like the task force had happened, women were separated from their community. They were in these really difficult, like prison conditions. So the point of creating choices was not to replicate that again. So
Hmm.
not to have the division of the classification. But if you look
Hmm.
at the way that the law is crafted so that every prisoner will be assigned minimum, medium, or maximum security, and then their scale is so long. And when you tick off on the scale, uh then you'll like be in this quad of this third or this third or this third, and some of the factors are dynamic and some are static, and that scale, like Aaliyah said, is built for men, and what they've had to do is take that scale and shrink it so that now there's these tiny little spots, and when you apply it to women they'll fall into this. So basically, if you took the men's scale and applied it to women, every single woman would be classified as a minimum security prisoner.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
because I don't know why they have to make all women be minimum, medium, or maximum, but what they do is they shrink it. So all of these minimum women are now like, so these women here who are maybe like higher on the scale are now put into maximum security, which is a
Right.
segregation wing. It's a segregated living environment. And so
Right.
Aaliyah and Heather have talked about how damaging segregation is as a practice. There's the United Nations Special Rapporteur has said that it's torture. Segregation is torture. We have
Hmm.
Louise Arbour in the Arbour Commission saying segregation should not be used only ever as a last resort. It should be highly limited, and we have case law that says it should be limited like to like
Hmm.
15 days ever in your whole life. But so if you
Hmm.
have women designated as maximum security, they're in a segregation unit. So for women to be moved around to a maximum security unit, you're basically segregating them.
Hmm.
So and this is important to understand because the Canadian Human Rights Commission said in 2003 that Correctional Service of Canada discriminates against women on the basis of race, sex, and disability because of the way that they classify. Because what ends up happening is those women with particular static factors like poverty, some of their race, like it's a tick against you if you're racialized, your history of victimization, all of those things, if you tick against you there, the women who have the highest needs, the ones who have mental health issues, who have had a lived experience of violence prior to coming to prison, who've had a lived experience of criminalization or a history of being in residential schools themselves, or a survivor or a child of or a grandchild of a survivor. Those women are more likely to serve their time in a maximum security unit. So you
Hmm.
have there have been times where almost all of the maximum security units in women's prisons are almost entirely made up of Indigenous or racialized women. So, and if you take a snapshot on any given day, it's disproportionately Indigenous women, then other racialized women, and then white women who are on those units. And all of
Hmm.
the women have mental health needs and that sort of thing. So that's that's a problem when women are when the prison is using maximum security as a tool to manage the conflict between
Hmm.
prisoners in particular. But the other
Right.
problem that happens, so Heather was talking about, Bill C-16 and the way that Bill 16 rolled out. There was a policy prior to Bill 16, C-16, sorry, that said you had to have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, you had to have had sex reassignment surgery, and you had to have lived your life for a minimum of 12 months as the opposite sex. So you had to live that way, and to basically be able to gain admission to a women's
Hmm.
institution.
Hmm.
And then C-16 came along and made self ID,
Hmm.
made that policy was no longer lawful under Bill
Hmm.
C-16 because self ID
Hmm.
took priority.
Right.
So what CSC was doing initially, I don't know what they're doing now, was sort of looking at all of the transfer requests in a sort of dynamic way. They were
Hmm.
trying to meet all of these moving pieces, the understanding that trying to, I mean, trying to understand that women in prison have a particular profile of lived experience behind them before transfers were happening. And so looking at and trying to weed out people who had asked for a transfer who might have had a history of sexual violence in their past, in terms of being perpetrators,
Hmm.
and some of the ways that they could allow a transfer, um, and mitigate the risk to the broader population was to possibly put those particular prisoners in a maximum security unit. And they talked about how, as soon as they took like a male prisoner on a male scale who would be minimum or medium security and be in a minimum or medium institution, if they applied to that same person the scale that they use for women, now all of a sudden that person should be placed in maximum security. So then what's happening is they're placing the trans prisoner, like a trans identified male prisoner, into the maximum security unit where there are women who are disproportionately victims of violence in their
Hmm.
past and have
Hmm.
had these. So
Okay.
they're the most marginalized women, truly, the most marginalized women are in maximum security.
Hmm.
And
I'm
then
just going to
now,
interrupt you there, Candice, because we're running low on time, and we have a list of questions that have come from people that are here, watching at the webinar. So the history is really important, and I think you got to that point of explaining how the men get in there and where they are in location to the women. But I'm going to ask a couple of questions that people sent, if that's all right. And you started this talking about the process for corrections in evaluating a man for women's prison. You said there used to be a process where it was the transsexual, post-surgical, gender dysphoria, those kind of things, right? And now it's just um, random. Is it just self-declaration, I imagine? Is that how somebody gets in? And is that is there any evaluation whatsoever?
yeah, that's what I meant. That's the evaluation that they do. So they have to apply for the transfer, and give the
Right.
reasons for why they're applying, and then the
Yeah.
prison will look at it and evaluate it. I don't know if their policy, if they've likely introduced a new policy or changed the way that the practice was, but initially they were just
Yeah.
looking at them one off and doing a sort of dynamic analysis of who they could put in and who they couldn't, and if they could put it in, if they couldn't put into general population, then could they put in under these other circumstances? And so they were moving
And
a
we're
lot of people.
so does anybody know how many apply and how many get turned away?
Heather might know that.
Do you know that, Heather? Are people turned away? Because it sounds like there's some pretty horrific characters that are getting in.
Yes, they have denied transfer requests, and they use the clause overriding health and safety concerns, which could include
Okay.
a number of different things. But
Okay.
yes, they have
Okay.
denied. Also, when we did like some A-tipping and all of that stuff, we found that 50% of the transfer requests were from men who committed sex crimes. And then recently, Correctional Service of Canada released their own report. Gosh, it might even be 2 years ago now. And they
Hmm.
identified that 44% of men who identify as women are convicted of sex crimes. They
Mhm.
also found that 86% of them committed violent offenses, and 94% of them have committed their crimes as their biological sex. And then
Mhm.
once charged, they start identifying as a woman. Um,
Right.
so yes, not all of them have been in, or else if they were, oh my gosh, we'd be in a lot of trouble. The women would not
But
be
they
safe at all.
but they still let in some pretty horrific characters. With that said, there's been
Yes.
some really horrific men that have committed some horrific crimes against children and
Mhm.
women that have been and are in our women's institutions. In our
Mhm.
institutions that I must say that we haven't mentioned yet have mother-child programs in them.
Yes. And can you talk about that a bit more, Leah? Because I know that I've seen some of the profiles of people who've been transferred, men who've been transferred, and their crimes that they were convicted for and where they're located. And so it makes me wonder who they're turning away when they're letting in somebody like there's a particular man in
Yeah, Fra-
Fraser, yeah. And
yeah,
can you talk about him?
Fraser Valley Institution, who his crime was he was charged for sodomizing a baby.
Right.
And he's in there in a, like I said, an institution where there's a mother-child program. And, although a lot of our work, unfortunately, us being a small organization, Heather and I especially, we do a lot of groundwork talking to women inside. And, there's been complaints of that certain person that's wandering around the mother-child house, which
Yeah.
is very disturbing to think. So, like I said, with, you know, whatever policies they may have in place, there's some horrific men inside there. There's, and, not to touch on, like, not even just the sexual assault, the dynamic inside women's prison has changed.
Right.
There are women that are scared that they're used to just being manipulated by men. So there's women turning against women. There's, men sleeping with multiple women in there. They're handing out the morning after pill in our health cares. So there's, concerns around women pregnancies. There's a lot of concerns, not just obviously sexual assaults,
Right.
and it just really affects just women's rehabilitation in general.
Right. Right. Of course. And have any men been removed from women's prisons after being allowed in when there's been something particularly
No,
horrific? No.
they don't involuntarily transfer them back to men's prisons, but they do involuntarily transfer them to another woman's prison. So
Oh,
yes, they're removed, but they're not removed back to the men's prison. The only time they have gone back to the men's prison is if they have requested to be sent back to the men's prison. And there have been some who have requested to go back to the men's prisons. Um,
okay.
One that a lot of people are probably familiar with is Michael Williams. He is the one that was in Edmonton, Alberta, and he murdered a 13-year-old Indigenous girl named Nina. Um, and he elected to go back to the men's prison.
Hmm.
And then there's also was another one that was in Fraser Valley that went by the name Coco, and he also elected to go back to the men's prison because he's been in for like over 2 decades, and he wanted to go to the women's prison to be able to try to get parole. And
Mm.
then, like 2 weeks before his parole date, he actually ended up fighting his entire house of women. Like, he picked the couch up with the women sitting on it and threw it. He ended up beating up a woman pretty bad, and she like miscarried. She was pregnant with one of the men's babies in Fraser Valley, and he was no longer being allowed to go for parole. They
Mm.
canceled his parole hearing, and he elected to go back to the men's prison. But
Right.
I do not know of an instance where Correctional Service of Canada has transferred them involuntarily to a men's.
Right. Yeah. Um, okay, I'm going to go to some of these other questions. And are there prison guards, or what does the prison guard union have to say about any of this? Or are there prison guards that are concerned about this as well?
Yes. So the correctional officers in Quebec, They've actually protested, wanting an increase in security measures because their jobs are becoming unsafe because of the safety risks. Um, sorry, I have this awful cough that I've had for like 3 weeks and it won't go away.
Uh,
Um, they've asked for like 90 or 40 millimeter gas launchers, for like men's sites to be able to deploy to women's sites. Basically just like an increase in security. There have been female correctional officers that do not want to strip search these men. Um, there was actually just some news articles that came out of Quebec. This is provincial level, not federal. Just in, I want to say August and September. So the provincial correctional officers actually walked out on the job and they were basically striking because the female officers did not want to strip search these men. Um, so there have been instances where the correctional officers have said something, but for the most part, most of them won't speak out.
right.
So I've done a lot of protesting at the different women's prisons across Canada. And actually, when I was at Fraser Valley protesting, it was the guards that tipped me off about the pregnancies.
Uh,
I actually didn't know about them until the guard said something.
right.
And then I do know there are correctional officers in Ontario here as well that say that they want to speak out,
Hmm.
but that they're worried. They want to wait till they retire because they're not allowed to speak. But then
Hmm.
they're also worried if they do speak out when they're retired, what will happen, because they're worried about their pension. Um,
Ah,
so there isn't really a whole lot of correctional officers that
right.
have publicly, anyways, like
Hmm.
we all know April. April started publicly speaking about this when she retired. But other than her, I don't know any correctional officers that have personally publicly spoken. But I do
Right.
know that the Guards Union is just advocating for an increased security in women's prisons, which are just going to defeat
Right.
everything that we have worked towards and return women's prisons back to prison for women in Kingston, Ontario.
Right. Of course. Yeah. So someone was asking about the minister responsible, and I think Dominique LeBlanc is the federal minister responsible for correctional services. And then there's a woman named Anne Kelly, I found, Commissioner of Correctional Services. Have either of those people ever responded to any concerns or commented on problems when anybody's approached them, or do they just ignore any communication? Have you had contact with either of those people? Anybody?
So I really worked hard on reaching out to um, everyone in a place of power, especially like the MPs,
Mhm.
and none of them cared. We
Right.
just got a template letter back telling us that everything's gravy and Bill C-16 is just wonderful.
Hmm.
So I have given up on trying to take that approach to getting
Right.
answers.
Right.
So no, lately I haven't. Just because honestly, it's a waste of time. Like you
Right.
need to focus on the general public and get them upset so that they're
Yes.
upset enough that they're sending out letters to their sitting
Yes.
MPs because the MPs only care about their seat. So if
Yeah.
they have enough people in their riding that are upset about a certain situation and they're constantly bombarding them with letters,
Yeah.
they're going to realize, ooh, my seat is at risk. I better say something.
Yeah.
I found that that's definitely been more of a better approach,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they just don't care.
Yeah. And yeah, that's another question that people are asking is what can they do? What can we do? What can the general public in Canada do? And that's an obvious one. That's a good one. Write letters to politicians. Meet with your politicians if you can get access to them. Federal is the key. Although I don't think there's any harm in meeting with provincial politicians as well, but that would be in addition to and letter writing to any of those people in charge. Are there other things that you would want to say to people that would really help if you did this. What can people do for your organization to support you or to get involved?
Um, oh,
It,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, just the um, I mean, we're talking about the issue of men in women's prisons, and we're talking about how transgender prisoners transferring into women's prisons has had an impact. And that's not something to deny. But what I really would like to try to hit home is that prisons, especially for women, for everybody, are not the place where we should be
Mm-hmm.
dealing with social problems. And they've
Mm-hmm.
become the catch-all, and they are the catch-all. And so
Mm-hmm.
the best thing that we can do as a society, as a culture, as a community, is to
Mm-hmm.
support our social safety net, is to support community-based options.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Heather's talking about, stat release. That's something for people to know. You're eligible to get out of prison after you've served 1/3 of your sentence. You're eligible for parole. And then if you
Yeah.
don't make parole, you are automatically released at 2/3 of your sentence under community supervision for statutory release. And that's actually designed specifically to ensure that people are released into the community under a graduated system with supports and with monitoring in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So people sometimes are like, oh, you have to do, if you do the crime, do the time, and you should serve your entire sentence. And
Mm-hmm.
I just challenge people to understand that that's supposed to be so that it's happening in a graduated way and people are being supported and reintegrated gradually and successfully. Prisons
Mm-hmm.
are temporary.
Mm-hmm.
They're temporary, they're not a permanent solution for anything. So everybody who's serving a sentence is eventually going to come back into the community. And the best
Yeah.
thing that we can do actually is to
Mm-hmm.
avoid criminalization in the
Mm-hmm.
first place. And so
Mm-hmm.
how do we do that? We have a social safety net. We have places
Mm-hmm.
for people to go to have their social needs met so they're not subject to a process of criminalization.
For sure.
Now, if we're talking about women in particular, I would say we need a community that takes women's equality seriously, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't have that right now. We don't have an adequate social safety net. We could support guaranteed livable income. Nowhere in Canada are social assistance rates enough to support anybody living on it, and it hasn't been that way for almost 40 years. And the
Mm-hmm.
primary users of social assistance are women and their children. So
Mm-hmm.
supporting those kinds of things, not just blindly saying no, let's not do that. That would be a really great way to support public safety, honestly,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
then you're avoiding incarceration in the first place.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, Heather's talking about, the union asking to have all of these additional safety measures coming into women's prisons because of the particular type of prisoner that's being transferred from men's institutions. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't support the use of that in a men's prison in any case. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you there's a there's a lot of criticisms of the way that we treat people who are in prison in the first place. Women, as I've said, creating choices, we've talked about that. Women's prisons are supposed to be a replica of the community, and they are, but just in the worst possible way. So of course I don't support the use of all of these extra security measures and these violent ways of managing prisoners, but I wouldn't support that in men's prisons either. And I would encourage the community to also look at, humanity and uh, treating people with dignity and with respect, because it costs us less in the long run to do that.
Yeah. 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 Obviously, prevention is key to any issues, and that's an important one
You
for
know,
sure.
I think speaking out's huge too, like just the
Yeah.
fact that, we've been an organization for, a few years now, and we haven't had many organizations like yours reach out to us and even be willing to have a conversation. I think having conversations around women in prison is going to
Mm-hmm.
bring awareness that people don't even know. You talk to a lot of people and they don't actually know what's going on inside
No.
there. I was in prison, and for all those years, I actually didn't even know my rights were even being violated until I was released. Like, we need people to be educated. We need, people to step up and help other help organizations out that, have different skill sets and all of that. So I think coming
Yeah.
together as a community, and obviously, like I said, having awareness and just education like this is going to be huge, because, the more people are aware, then the more we're going to get on board to hear what's actually happening and help understand and, come up with ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think too, like, donations is a big one too, because the three of us, we fund everything we do from
Right.
our pocket.
Right.
We went to like the prostitution convention in Montreal in May,
Yeah.
and where we were like selling our t-shirts. So like we bought a bunch of t-shirts to be able to sell them, and like
Hmm.
we want to be involved for a lot of different issues for women, and it's just hard because we don't have like government funding or grants or things like
Right.
that. But
Right.
also like doing like your photo for Women's Space Vancouver when you do your overpass thing,
Yeah.
that's supporting, like that's getting the
Yes.
word out, right? Um,
Yes.
there's always a protest somewhere. Like I will be in Calgary in March and I
Mm.
will be protesting. So
Mm.
if anyone's in the area there, come on out.
Mm.
Let's protest. Let's, go
Right.
eat and chat and learn. And um, I think like just being supportive, boots on the ground, learning. The panels are great. Like when I first got out of prison, like it was E. Fry who was like, "You have an amazing story. Like, you're important. Like, you need to speak on our panels and let the public know." And they're the ones that got me into public speaking. Like, I
Right.
spoke on numerous panels for them regarding
Hmm.
like strip searching and like um, just my own personal experience with incarceration. And like,
Yeah.
that's one thing that I definitely miss because once I started speaking out about all this gender identity ideology, they definitely dropped me because they don't want me representing
Right.
them.
Right.
But like it would be nice if I didn't have to focus on this one issue all the time and
Yeah.
like I could focus on other issues that are truly meaningful to me.
Hmm.
I feel like it's super unfortunate that there's not more people out there willing to take on this issue, and I have to put everything else that's important to me aside because if I don't fight this, then who is, right?
Right.
Um, but I think
Right.
like there's a lot we can do together as long as we are in like contact and connection with each
Yes.
other, right?
Yeah. And if people want to know where protests might be, where they can donate money, how they can get involved, get more information, is your sis website the best place for that? And is there contact information there? Yeah.
Yes, so you can donate on Strength and Sisterhood's website for like the stuff we do. The
Okay.
protests aren't done through Strength and Sisterhood. They're more of a me thing. Um,
Okay.
and also with association of the other organization that I operate.
Okay.
Um, but people can reach out to me. Like I'm not on Facebook under Heather Mason right now because
Right.
I was switching up my job. So I didn't
Right.
want potential employers to come across me on Facebook because that
Right.
put a wrench into employment. But
Okay.
I'm still on X.
Okay. So
Yeah.
people can find you on X and it's your name, right?
And
Yes.
feel free to email us at, Strength and Sisterhood as well. We
Right.
can, we're all in connection. So if women have
Yeah.
questions, obviously reach out. There's,
Yeah.
we're pretty active trying to at least answer those.
Okay. And any other last words from anybody that you want to say to the group? There's people besides me here listening. So, and we are recording this. So if there's any last words you want to say, I mean, you've really covered a lot of territory. It's been great.
I just want to say, like, thank you for coming out and listening and supporting us, and we feel heard. It definitely makes me happy to know that there are people willing to understand what prison is like.
Mhm.
So I just want to say that I appreciate the platform that was given and the
Mm.
interest in what we have to say.
Great. Thank you. Candace, any last words from you before we go?
Just thank you so much, Chris. Thanks to Women's Space. Thanks for everybody coming. Thank you so much.
And thank you for the history lesson. And Aaliyah, any last
I'll just
words from you?
basically second and third the big thank you to um, Women's Spaces Vancouver, you and Chris behind the scenes, Chris and Chris, you guys have been, adamantly emailing and, all of that. And I appreciate, all your guys' time from,
Yeah.
the times we've met and all of that. And, obviously everybody that sat here the last hour and a half who actually cares about the quality of women's life inside prison. A huge shout out to that. And yeah, like obviously not to like, throw out shouts, but if people need women to come speak, Heather and I are very adamant. She's in Ontario and I'm in BC about speaking on women's prison topics. So it'd be
Right.
awesome if other people are listening, think, oh, we could have this group listen to them, or just reach out. It'd be awesome. And again,
Yeah.
thanks for the platform. That's huge. Like we haven't been given many opportunities. So it's
Right.
really, really amazing to be recognized by such a group of solid women.
Well, and we, like, as you know, we are recording and we are going to have this posted on our website. We're going to have it. We have a YouTube channel and we will be sharing it. So this will
Awesome.
be available. We'll keep you informed about that. There's so many more questions we didn't have time to answer. I got to most of the ones that were sent in before. There's been others. So people can reach you for more information at Strength and Sisterhood website. It's easy to find if you just type that into a search. It's been amazing to have you. You're just like a wealth of information and experience and knowledge. You're experts on this. Nobody is more experts on this than you three. So it's been, been thrilling to have you and to take the time out to do this on a weekend when I know you work and have kids and all kinds of stuff going on. Thank you. Really appreciate it. It's been
Awesome.
great.
Thanks again, Chris.
Okay. See you again.
See you.